It's my honor to introduce Haven Pierce, an assistant professor of landscape architecture at UC Davis, and Kevin Perry, principal of urban rain designs. Take it away, team.
Okay, so looking at construction, one of the first things once you have your rain garden plan, you've met all the you don't want to do is call to see where those utilities are located before you actually take your shovel and start doing work. And so this is the number to allow that to happen. It's a free service. You call this number, they come out and mark where all the utilities are. And once you understand where those utilities are, then you can have the fun portion of the demolition work and start creating your rain garden space with the removal of the lawn or the hardscape. And then kind of checking, you can see here that you can see the painted line on the lawn there. That's where there's a power line running through there. So kind of slowly excavating where those areas are, where you know there's utilities underneath, and understanding where the depths of those utilities might be. This is, like I said, this is the fun work. These are my students excavating lawn for a rain garden. And I guess the common question is, where do I put all this stuff? And so that's a question I actually don't, each county, each jurisdiction has kind of rules as to what they can put in compost. And so that's a question to ask yourself, is where do I put my demoed lawn material? And then going further down in the process, excavating your soil. Ideally, and this isn't always the case, but if you can balance what you're excavating for that recessed portion, if you can balance and utilize that same soil on your property in some respect, then that saves with the cost and the associated labor of removing that soil off your project site. So in this application, we're balancing it. We're taking soil from the rain garden, and we're just flipping it on end to an upper area and balancing that soil. The rough grading process is just kind of understanding how far deep or how far down we want to carve out that rain garden space. These are students understanding what a slope, what an actual. I actually have a template for them to understand a certain side slope ratio for them to excavate the soil, and sometimes it's a lot of soil. Here's some soil excavation and rough grading in action at a rain garden. You can see there's some pretty big clumps of soil through there. So this is just kind of, again, rough grading. We're just excavating out that soil as much as possible. And then during that process, again, depending on the soil conditions, you may want to introduce compost material and rototill that, or at least mix it in with your existing soil, again, to promote more infiltration and possibly, even more importantly, just better plant growth conditions. So this is showing that nice soil being tilled into existing soil. And then also knowing that sometimes we build these when it is raining outside. And this is an example of one of my projects that we built. And we had a very quick storm come in, and we had to apply some erosion control and safety protocols in there. You can see there's a tarp there that's covering up excavated soil so that we're not creating runoff of soil into the storm drain system. And I've actually diverted the downspout pipe. You can see it's supposed to go into the rain garden. I've diverted it away from the rain garden itself. And again, just kind of applying some simple techniques of cordoning off the space so that somebody doesn't get hurt in that construction process. There's different ways, again, to retain the soil grade. I mentioned this before, using vertical elements. Maybe it's metal edging, kind of just showing applications of that. You can see how the rain garden in this area is taking shape. But it doesn't have to be hardscape material. It can just be just simple berming or a mounding of the soil that allows the water to be retained. Okay, Haven, you want to talk about irrigation a bit?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways to use irrigation and to irrigate your rain garden. And I would say that in our location, it really, there's always people who say, oh, you don't need to irrigate. It's really good to have irrigation, even if it's just as backup, because we go through, even with our drought tolerant plants, even with a rain garden, there are going to be periods when you need to irrigate. So drip irrigation is the most utilized form of irrigation in rain gardens. And so you can see there's on the left-hand side of the screen is inline drip emitters. And so basically they're little emitters within the drip tubing every 12 inches or every 18 inches. And so they're giving off a certain amount of water as you're turning it on. Then we also have the micro sprays. And so that's in the upper right-hand corner. And so that's spraying it out a little bit more, but over a very specific area. And then the tubing, where it's actually, it's also called spaghetti, where each plant has its own little emitter of water that it's given to. In terms of ease of design, I'm using more and more just the inline drip emitters put down in a grid across the entire surface. It seems to work the best for me. But then the other options, next slide, are you can also modify your own existing spray irrigation. And so this is an example of one of Kevin's projects where they took the spray irrigation that was existing and they added more emitters and they modified them so that it actually was, they used water efficient spray heads, so that you're not just sending out huge amounts of water, you're using something like an MP rotator that actually just lets out little bits amount of much less water and is much more effective. And so you can do that with what you have. You can also retrofit your existing overhead irrigation and turn it into drip really pretty easily. So the irrigation part, it's the part that always scares me a little bit, but it's really not nearly as scary as you think it is. It's really straightforward and easy to do. Okay, next slide. So once you've got the irrigation in place, then you want to go through and do just a fine grading of the soil, right? We saw how the students had done it so that they got that general grading. But with the irrigation in place, and sometimes you want that irrigation subsurface, so it's covered with the soil. At times it'll be at the surface. It really depends on what you want, but you want to do that fine grading then, so that you have the slopes where you want them, and your garden is ready to be planted. Next slide. So you can see more of those with just kind of cleaning out any of the spots. So then it's time, go ahead, did you want to add something?
No, I'm just messing up.
So in terms of plant installation, the first thing is really staging the plants. And so getting them, you go to the nursery, maybe you go to a few different nurseries, you've got them. And so I really like to put like with like, so that I know, this is where all of my Bouteloua is, or this is where all of my Russian sage is, and they're all put together. And what we did here was that we actually lined them up along the edge in general where they were going to go. Next slide. And then it's actually going through and placing the plants. And so I don't know if you see the orange paint line in the right-hand side. So in this case, we had created, from the design, Kevin had created these blocks of plants. And so we went through and used the paint, the marking paint, to create where those spaces were, and then took the plants, spaced them out where they were going to go so that they were all placed, so that we could step back, maybe move them around a little bit, make sure that they're all spaced, that they're in the place where we want them, before we then went in to plant. Next slide. And so, yeah, these are all, both Kevin and I rely heavily on students to help us with our projects. So here you can see the students going in and actually planting the plants in the spots where we want them to. And really the main trick with the planting is just that you want to make sure that the hole is approximately twice the size of the plant container that you're planting. And you want to break up those roots before you put the plant in. So a lot of times you'll get a plant and it's root bound, and you'll see the roots are all kind of crunkled up and really stuck in the shape of the pot. Break them up. Don't be afraid to break them up. It's really okay. It's a good thing to do. Break them up, then put that plant in. And then the other main thing to think about is you don't want the crown of the plant, you don't want that bit of soil around the top to be up above the soil level, and you don't want it to be too low. you really want it right at the surface of the grade. If it's too high, then you've got roots exposed and it won't do well. If it's too low, then you end up covering a big part of the plant and blocking off the air that it needs to thrive. So really keep it right there at the surface. Next slide. And then the mulch application, which if Kevin is saying demolition is fun, then I'm gonna go with mulch. It can be really fun too. But it is by far the most satisfying of all of the pieces, because once you've got mulch around the plant, it really gives it that finished look. And so it's really important for the initial to suppress the weeds, to hold the water in. And then the one tip I would say with mulch is not putting it up right against the stem of the plant. You want to have it, you want to put the mulch down and then just pull it around, back a little bit from that central, from the main stems of the plant so that it can breathe. Next slide. So some more applications of mulch. And I do think it's important. I mean, this is a rain garden that we did in the design building at Hunt, and we did put some rocks around an existing drain. But I do think it's important to note that not all rain gardens have to be lined with rocks. It can be a benefit, it can make things easier to drain, but it's absolutely not a requirement. You can just use mulch and that's fine. Rocks can be added, rocks can be good, but it is not a requirement. Like, don't think that you have to go, if you're doing a rain garden, it's gonna be all rocks and then, you know, with some plants on the side. Okay, next slide. And so then essentially you've done it. Right? You've done all the things that you need to do. So you just want to like make sure that you've done it right. It's kind of like a post-occupancy evaluation, but beforehand, right? You want to make sure that you followed all the rules that we already talked about, that, you know, that it captures as much as we said, that you've got the good plant coverage that you want, you know, that you don't have the edible plants in that wetted area because you don't want to potentially get sick. Downslope from the garden. We've gone through this, but you want to just like, you've gone through, you've done your construction. Now make sure post-conversion, check off, thumbs up when you're done.